Good evening. This is John. As I'm recording this, it's one day after the Bernie's defeat in New York by a significant margin. So there's a lot of, I think, soul searching at this point. Some may feel that, and including many supporters believe that Bernie Sanders can win the nomination. I think it's clear at this point that he won't be able to, and certainly the Democratic machine will do everything to prevent it, and they have succeeded. There were many examples of voter irregularities in New York. New York is famous for its corrupt voting process and all the obstacles placed in the way of independent movements and parties. But as I have written on before, there is an alternative to Bernie being the nominee of the Democratic Party. In fact, there might be even a better solution, a better path to the presidency, to the White House. It will just require a lot of convincing, including the presidential candidate himself. Bernie Sanders has made it clear in the past that he does not intend on being a spoiler. I personally do not accept that terminology, spoiler. That only legitimizes the corrupt two-party system, the duopoly, the monopoly of the two parties. There's no such thing as a spoiler. The feeling is that if, and the concern is, and it's a legitimate concern, that if Bernie Sanders ran as a third-party candidate, that would mean Donald Trump would get into the White House. We don't want that. I certainly don't want that. I don't want America to become a fascist state, which is what would happen. But the best way of preventing that is, in fact, if Bernie Sanders ran as an independent candidate, as a third-party candidate. Here's my reasoning. I think the facts bear it out. Currently, Bernie Sanders is tied with Hillary Clinton nationally, in national polls. So, in fact, he is the stronger candidate amongst Democrats, as it stands. Now, you might find that somewhat. You might be saying to yourself right this moment, "What is he talking about?" But the polls show it, and the reason for it is very simple. Hillary had the advantage from the very beginning, ever since Bernie Sanders announced his candidacy over 6 months ago. in that in terms of name recognition. That is her only advantage. She has nothing else going for her. As voters learned more and more about Bernie Sanders, that is when his poll numbers began to rise. That is when he started to win more, began to win more states. He had a nice win streak prior to New York, and we can understand to some extent why he did poorly in New York. Well, it's Hillary Clinton's state. She's run twice in the state. And then, of course, New York is where Wall Street is. And New York is the corrupt political machine that it is. They have a very sophisticated get out the vote machinery. And so, but the point is that he's running neck and neck. And that's because, once again, as Bernie Sanders became known, and as they heard his message, he became more popular. And what's there not to like if you are a non-member of the 1%? Then there is and let's recognize this, that this was a closed primary in New York. That means that only Democrats got to vote. Didn't include independents, where Bernie Sanders does far better, because he is in fact an independent candidate. So in a general election, it is highly likely that Bernie Sanders would win New York. He got over 40% of the vote in the primaries. You add that to the independent voters, and by the way, the independent voters are a larger group than either the Democratic or Republican Party. The mainstream media won't really tell you about that. So Bernie Sanders would win New York. He would also likely win California. Now, what about Donald Trump? Well, let's look at the numbers. 2/3 of Republican voters, and at least I believe 2/3 of voters, or in a substantial majority of Republican voters, oppose Donald Trump. So what would happen is, and this has been threatened, so in either case, if Trump loses, what would happen is that his supporters would not vote for the GOP candidate, the GOP nominee. Many of them would stay home or vote third party. They might run in as a third party candidate, or he has threatened Donald Trump has threatened to run as a third-party candidate. So what would happen is that would split the GOP vote. Either way, if Trump wins the nomination, the Republican establishment will run a third-party candidate. There's no question about that. So you look at these factors, along with the fact that Bernie Sanders does not have a problem raising funds, which is essential to winning, apparently to winning the White House. You have to raise money. Bernie Sanders does not have that problem. So he would be the strongest candidate if he would run as a third-party candidate. And I didn't even mention the fact that Hillary could be indicted between now and the general election. That is a possibility, although I think the White House would do everything to prevent that. But there is that possibility, that potential that Hillary, and in that case, she would be severely damaged. So it is essential that Bernie Sanders not only that he run as a third-party candidate. Not only does he stand a very good chance of winning, but he's obligated at this point to prevent either Donald Trump or possibly even Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz is despised by the party establishment as much, and he is a sinister character, maybe not to the extent of Donald Trump, but he is a frightening prospect nonetheless to have in the White House. So we have to prevent that. We have to stop that. Bernie must consider running. And I think he realizes that his supporters, a very large percentage of Bernie supporters, will not vote for Hillary Clinton. This means that the GOP candidate has a very good chance of beating Hillary. And most importantly, probably just as important as anything else that I've mentioned, and we poll after poll after poll has shown that Bernie Sanders does better against Republicans than Hillary Clinton. Significantly better. Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton have historically high negative approval ratings. More people have a negative view of them than a positive view. Bernie Sanders has a positive. Historically, candidates that have high negatives do not win the White House, do not win nominations. So all of those factors make it essential and logical for Bernie Sanders to run as a third-party candidate for the presidency in the fall.